Now, it's probably one of the most misunderstood things in all of Star Wars, and that is, just what does it mean for the Force to be in balance? Well, many people incorrectly think that balance occurs when there is equal parts light to dark, like two sides of a scale that are even with each other. But that's actually not how it works at all. Balance in Star Wars is not some type of middle ground between the two. In fact, that's the complete wrong type of balance that we're even looking for, or wrong definition of the word. Because imbalance in Star Wars is actually created by the mere existence and use of the dark side. It's not at all about there being too much of the dark side, or a need for just the right amount of it to offset or counterbalance the light side. Rather, the kind of balance we're looking for is when everything is in harmony or there is stability, where everything is okay and nothing is causing things to be off kilter or out of whack. Think of the balance you have when you're standing firmly on your own 2 feet on a nice flat steady surface. This is the type of balance the Force seeks to be in, a state where everything is operating as normal, one free of the dark side and the corruption and problems it can cause. Because what you have to understand is that the dark side is unnatural. It is a corruption of the way the Force should be, a flaw within the system that prevents things from proceeding as they should. It may be called the dark side, but it is not called this to imply it is just another side of the same coin, if you will. The Force is not separated into two parts. It is not both the darkness and the light, but rather the Force is the light side, while the dark side is an unwanted aspect of the Force created by those who are trying to bend it to their own will instead of, as the Jedi are supposed to do, follow the will of the Force itself. And that is the real key here. The existence of the Jedi, no matter how many thousands there may even be at one time, does not cause imbalance because they essentially act on behalf of the Force. In other words, they're basically only supposed to be doing what the Force tells them to be doing to keep things running smoothly. Remember what Qui-Gon Jinn tells Anakin in The Phantom Menace, that when he learned to quiet his mind, he would be able to hear, through the midi-chlorians of course, the will of the Force, and then follow it and it alone. And this, in my opinion, is what makes Qui-Gon the truest Jedi we've seen in the prequels. He continually disobeyed the Council and instead did what he was supposed to do, listen to and heed the will of the Force above all else. The Jedi of the prequel era didn't fail because there were too many of them, and they were tipping some imaginary scale out of balance in favor of the light. The Jedi of the prequel era failed because they stopped simply following the will of the Force and followed the will of the Senate, and this, losing their alignment with the will of the Force, is what likely made them susceptible to Palpatine and the dark side, because they failed to listen to the Force and listen to the warning. A warning that Obi-Wan apparently hears and mentions very early in The Phantom Menace when he says he has a bad feeling about this, but not about their current mission, but rather something elsewhere, something elusive. I truly believe this is the will of the Force trying to warn Obi-Wan of the impending return of the Sith, and it's quite likely Qui-Gon felt this too, but of course wanted to, as he said at the time, keep his attention on the current mission. The question then becomes, why didn't anyone on the Council sense the impending threat, this Phantom Menace? I mean, if a Padawan like Obi-Wan felt it, why didn't they? Well, Obi-Wan, being a student of Qui-Gon, had no doubt been trained to heed the will of the Force above all else, a lesson he sadly forgot as time went by because he too would eventually wind up on the Council and become simply a tool of the Republic. But at this point, during the Phantom Menace, he was probably very in tune with the Force and heard the warning about the return of the dark side. And we know that the Council, again not being as in tune with the will of the Force as they should be, likely didn't get a warning because they seemed very shocked that the Sith had somehow returned, with some, like Mace Windu, apparently denying it was even possible despite what Qui-Gon was telling him. We even have Mace Windu and Yoda talk about how they were losing their ability to use the Force, which again is likely some type of backlash from the Force for not following its will. And whereas a Darksider does not hesitate to attempt to reshape the Force and use it in an unnatural way, a Jedi, even when losing their power, would likely not be inclined to try to coax power from the Force, even if it was failing them. This is likely the reason the dark side seems so much stronger during the prequels than the light side. And then there is the prophecy of the Chosen One. Just what is the deal with it? Was Anakin the Chosen One? Was it Luke? Or is it neither one? And just what does this prophecy even say? Well, within the context of the first 6 movies, and excluding whatever Lucasfilm and Disney may or may not do with the sequel trilogy and balance on the Force itself, Anakin is quite clearly and without question the Chosen One. How can I be so certain? Because he brought balance to the Force by destroying the dark side and anything and everything else causing imbalance, including the Jedi. And now you might be thinking, wait a second, you said before that the Jedi don't cause imbalance, no matter how many of them there are. And that's right, true Jedi who follow the will of the Force don't cause imbalance because they always seek to keep it. But the Jedi of the prequel era were not simply following the will of the Force. Again, they were following the will of the Senate or the Republic. And yes, they were trying to keep the peace, which we can certainly say is a good and noble cause. But they were doing so by following the orders of the Supreme Chancellor and the Senate, not by listening to the Force and doing as it instructed. So they were still going against the will of the Force, albeit with good intentions. So even though the Jedi of the prequel era were not wielding the dark side per se, they were still causing an imbalance by using the Force for their own purpose, a purpose that likely conflicted with what the will of the Force deemed them to be doing. And Anakin, the chosen one who would balance the Force, would eventually deal with them and right the imbalance they were causing. And even though we don't know the exact wording of the prophecy, we do know that it more or less said a chosen one would come about who would bring balance to the Force, and likely not much more than that. And the Jedi of this time, not realizing that they had lost their way and were no longer aligned fully with the Force and its will, did not realize they too caused imbalance, and would also be destroyed by the Chosen One. And now, this is where I mention that this is not just a theory on how balance works, but it is how George Lucas, on more than one occasion, has described it. This is also where I point out that Lucasfilm under Disney may be changing or expanding on this idea, even though I personally don't think they need to or even should. Because I like the idea of the dark side simply being a corruption of the natural order, and that balance isn't equal parts dark to light, which isn't even remotely how balance works in life. Because think about it, do you consider your life in balance when you have just as many good things happening as bad? Or do you think of your life as being balanced when everything is running smoothly? Nevertheless, I believe we may already be seeing signs of a change to come to George Lucas's original concept for what the Force is and how it works, or that something happened within the Star Wars galaxy itself at one point to change it. Because we've already been introduced to things such as the Bendu, who claims to be the one in the middle. And as I mentioned at the start, there really is no middle point of the Force. There is only the Force and the corruption of it, which is what the dark side truly is. Then of course, we've also learned about a dark side presence or power in the unknown regions of the galaxy, which we learn about in Aftermath. Palpatine thought this may somehow be the origin of the dark side, but I'm not sure how that would even work or be the case. Again, keeping in mind what the dark side is supposed to be. So I tend to believe this power, in a sense, is just a growing cancer of sorts within the Force. A culmination of the corruption done to the Force by countless Sith and other dark side users over the ages, and that Snoke could somehow be the manifestation of this dark side power. Which would mean the dark side has become something real and almost tangible, if you will, and not just an aspect of the Force created by the will of those with evil intent. Either way, I do look forward to seeing if The Last Jedi is going to begin to change our concept of the Force, risking the ire of the fans, or hold true to George Lucas's original vision, and they're only just messing with us. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Are we going to see changes to the concept of what the Force is, and in particular, what the dark side is and how balance works? Let me know in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.